By the time I'm telling you this, the war's been over for decades, but it's still in me. Some nights, it's louder than the crickets outside my window. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because there's a letter I never sent, and the person it was meant for never even knew I made it home. I wrote in France, 1944, on paper stained with dirt and blood. It burned halfway through when the farmhouse we were in took a hit. I kept the ashes anyway, because even a burned letter still says something. Before all that, I was just a kid from Kansas, 23, maybe 24, counting the days till harvest. I used to think the world ended at the edge of the wheat fields. My mom prayed every night that the war would end before I had to go. My dad never said a word. He just looked out the window and chewed the same piece of tobacco until it turned black. When the draft letter came, I folded it twice and tucked it in my back pocket, like maybe that'd make it less real. They trained us fast, shaved our heads, taught us how to kill, and told us it was for freedom. I remember standing in a wheat field the day before I shipped out. The wind was so strong it bent the whole world sideways. I told myself I'd come back. I told myself a lot of things. They called it D-Day, but that word doesn't mean what you think. It wasn't triumph. It was teeth. It was fire and water and screaming men. It was the ocean turning red faster than I could blink. The ram dropped and the world exploded. I remember seeing a guy next to me. He couldn't have been older than 19, catch a bullet right between the eyes. I don't remember the sound of it. I just remember the way his hand slipped out of mine when the next wave hit. When I reached the beach, I didn't run. I crawled. Every inch was bought with someone else's life. I thought of Kansas, of that field, of how quiet it was, and I laughed because I knew I'd never hear silence like that again. Everyone carried something, a photo, a Bible, a lucky coin. Me? I carried a sketchbook. I wasn't much of a soldier, but I could draw. When the days got bad, I'd draw the faces of the ones we lost. Not for glory, just so I wouldn't forget them. Some guys laughed at me for it, said it was sentimental bullshit. But when one of them got hit, they'd whisper, "Hey Jack, draw me next, okay?" The book got heavier every day, not from paper, but from ghosts. Malone was my sergeant, old-timer from New Jersey, talked like every sentence cost him a cigarette. He used to say, "War ain't about who's right, Turner. It's about who's left." He taught me how to reload blindfolded, how to sleep through artillery, how to tell the difference between courage and stupidity, and how sometimes there ain't one. He was the only man I ever saw make coffee in a helmet, and the only one who still called me kid, even after I stopped being one. It happened fast. Everything in war does. We were crossing a field near St. Lo. Fog so thick you could taste it. Then one shot. Malone dropped, right through the throat. I don't even remember firing back. I just remember the sound my own screaming made inside my helmet. When it was over, the smoke cleared, and the only thing moving was the blood sliding into the dirt. I pressed my hand to his wound, but there was no pulse, only warmth, fading fast. His coffee cup was still in his pack, untouched. After every battle, there's a silence. Not peace, just absence. No words, no wind, just the weight of what you can't undo. I sat among the bodies until the flies came, and for the first time, I realized how small the human voice sounds after the guns stop. Someone once told me soldiers don't cry. That's a lie. We just do it when no one's looking. That day, the only one watching was God, and I think even he looked away. That night, after Malone died, I tried to write home. I remember my hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from the cold, from the fact that his blood was still under my fingernails. I sat under a piece of tarp, rain drumming on the canvas, and pulled out one of those flimsy army-issue sheets. "Dear Lily," I wrote. Then I stopped. What was I supposed to say? "Hey, I watched a man I respected drown in his own blood today. How are things at the diner?" I lit. I told her I was fine, that the food was bad but the guys were funny, that I'd be home before you know it. There's a special kind of hell reserved for the moment you hear yourself lying on paper, and you keep going anyway. At the bottom I wrote, "Don't worry about me." Then I signed my name like I still knew who that was. A few weeks later, we took a small village. Secured is the word the reports use. What really means is, we walked in after the artillery stopped and tried not to step on bodies. There was a barn at the edge of town, half collapsed, still smoking. That's where I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not a man shouting, not a woman screaming, just whimpering, like a dog. When I pushed the door open, I saw him. Kid couldn't have been older than 15. German uniform hanging off him like it belonged to his older brother. Blood on his leg, dirt on his face, eyes way too big for someone who'd already seen this much. He flinched when he saw me. I flinched when I saw him. My rifle was up before my brain caught up. Then he said something. Not "don't shoot," not "Heil Hitler." He just whispered, "Bruder," brother. My hands went weak. I lowered the gun. We weren't supposed to, but I did it anyway. I tore a strip from my own bandage roll and wrapped his leg. He winced. Then he smiled, like I'd given him the world. And in that moment, if you'd asked me whose side I was on, I wouldn't have known how to answer. The next morning, the mood changed. Word came down from higher up. Too many prisoners, too little food, too much risk. The order was simple, ugly, short enough to fit on the back of a matchbox. No more prisoners. I stood there in the mud, stomach churning, listening to a man with clean boots explain to me why it had to be this way. All I could think about was the boy in the barn. I went back to check on him, heart hammering like a traitor in my chest. He was still there, still breathing, still looking at me like I was the only thing standing between him and hell. My rifle felt heavier than it ever had. You'd think a moment like that would be loud, but it wasn't. No music, no drumroll, just my own breath and his in sync. He said Bruder again, softer this time. I wish I could tell you I did the right thing. I wish I could tell you I proved the order wrong. But the truth is, I walked out of that barn alone, and the echo of the shot has followed me home every night since. That night I tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Not when I pulled the trigger. Before that, when he smiled because I helped him. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I took out my sketchbook. My hands were still shaking from the recoil. I started with the eyes. Big, afraid, but trusting. Then the nose. The smear of dirt across his cheek. The way his hair curled at the sideburns. My pencil kept slipping. I realized it was because my hand was wet. It took me a second to understand I was crying. There are some faces you draw because you want to remember, and some you draw because you know you'll never forget, and you just try to make peace with that. He ended up on a page between Malone and another buddy of mine who never made it off a hill outside Cannes. I closed the book, and for a second, the silence felt like a verdict. We kept moving. Town after town, field after field. After a while, the names all blurred together, but the faces never did. Then came the day they told us it was over. People poured into the streets of some half-broken city, waving flags, kissing strangers, shouting words like victory and freedom. I watched a kid climb a lamppost and hang a banner. Watched two soldiers pop a bottle of something they'd stolen from a ruined bar. Someone grabbed me, tried to pull me into a dance. I laughed it off, hands up like, "Sorry, ma'am, I don't know the steps." Truth was, I didn't know how to celebrate. They said the war was over, but my head was still in that barn, on that beach, in that field with Malone. Everybody else heard peace. All I heard was the list of names of the ones who weren't there to see it. They put us on a ship, then on a train, and somewhere along the way I realized I'd forgotten how to be a person who wasn't at war. When I stepped off the train back in Kansas, nothing had changed, and everything had. The platform was the same splintered wood, same peeling paint on the station sign, same smell of coal and dust. But the kid coming home wasn't the kid who left. My mom hugged me like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. My dad shook my hand like I was a stranger renting his spare room. The wheat fields were still there, waving like an ocean of gold. Everyone said, "You must be so glad to be home." I smiled, said the line, Yeah, it's good to be back." But somewhere in the corner of my eye, I could still see a barn in France, and a boy calling me brother. And then there was her, Lily. She was waiting right behind my parents, hair tied up in that way she used to do when she was working the morning shift at the diner. When our eyes met, it hit me harder than any artillery shell. She smiled, like the world hadn't fallen apart overseas, like I hadn't broken every promise I wrote in those letters. I walked toward her on legs that didn't feel like mine. She threw her arms around my neck and whispered, "You came back." I wanted to tell her, no, parts of me did. The rest are buried under someone else's sky. Instead, I just said, "Yeah, I told you I would, didn't I?" She talked about home, about the town, the gossip, the price of eggs. I nodded in all the right places, but every time she said, "Remember when?" all I could think was, "Yeah, and you have no idea what I've seen since then." The first night back, I couldn't sleep in a bed. Too soft, too quiet. My mom fussed over the blankets. My dad said something about how the boys earned his rest. But when the house went dark, I lay there staring at the ceiling, waiting for explosions that never came. At some point, I got up and went to the bathroom, turned on the light. The man in the mirror wasn't the guy from my high school yearbook. He had lines around his mouth that didn't used to be there, eyes that looked older than his parents. I leaned in and really looked at myself. There was dried mud in the seams of my hands that no amount of washing seemed to get rid of. I thought of the barn, the field, the beach, and for a split second, I understood why some guys never make it home even if their bodies do. Because standing there, in that little Kansas bathroom with the floral wallpaper, I felt like a ghost in my own life. I brought the sketchbook home with me. It was the only thing from over there I couldn't bring myself to throw away. For a long time, it lived in the top drawer of my dresser, under clean socks and old receipts. Like if I buried it deep enough, the ghost inside would stay quiet. Every once in a while, I'd catch my hand hovering over that drawer, fingers shaking, not from age, but from memory. Lily would ask, "Do you ever draw anymore?" Idée shuk. Say something like, "Been busy." Truth was I was scared that if I started drawing again, the first face that would come out of my pencil wouldn't be hers. It would be his, the boy in the barn. So I slammed the drawer shut and told myself I was done being an artist. Problem was, the war didn't get the memo. Years went by. The world moved on. They built highways over fields I used to play in. Kids started learning about the war from textbooks that smelled like fresh ink instead of cordite and mud. One night, a storm knocked the power out. House went dark, radio dead, just me and the sound of the rain. I lit a candle, and without really deciding to, I opened that dresser drawer. The sketchbook was there, so was something else, tucked between the back panel and the wood. A folded, half-burned piece of paper. France, the farmhouse. The letter I'd started to Lily and never sent. The edges were black, the middle still legible in my ugly handwriting. "Dear Lily, don't worry about me. I'm fine." I laughed. Actually laughed. It sounded rusty. Then I sat down, took out a pen, and started writing again. This time, I didn't lie. I didn't address the letter to Lily this time. Didn't address it to anyone, really. I just started with, here's what really happened. I wrote about Malone, about the field, about the way his coffee cup never got used that morning. I wrote about the boy in the barn, how he said brother, how I hesitated, how I didn't in the end. I wrote the thing I had never said out loud. Not to my parents, not to Lily, not to the therapist they told us to see years later when it became trendy to care about veterans' minds. I wrote, I killed someone who trusted me, and I've been trying to live a life that makes that count for something. I don't know how long I sat there, ink smearing where tears hit the page. When I finished, my hand was cramped, my eyes were raw, and for the first time since I stepped off that train, I felt lighter, not absolved, just honest. When the letter was done, I reached for the sketchbook. My fingers didn't shake this time, or maybe they did and I just didn't care. I opened it to a blank page, stared at the empty space for a long time. Then I drew him, not as a prisoner, not as the enemy, just as a boy who should have been working in a bakery, or flirting with someone at a dance, or failing math tests in some classroom, instead of bleeding in a foreign barn with a gun too big for his hands. I drew the way his hair fell into his eyes, the way his lips twitched when he tried not to look scared. Lines turned into shadows. Shadows turned into a face. When I finished, I closed the book and rested my hand on the cover. It didn't feel like forgiveness. It felt like finally telling the truth to someone who'd been waiting a very, very long time to hear it. I never mailed that letter. Didn't know who to send it to. Lily had moved on, married, kids, whole life that didn't need this kind of weight dropped into it. So I folded the pages, slipped them into an old envelope, and wrote no address at all, just one word on the front, truth. Some mornings, I sit on the porch with my coffee, watch the sun come up over the fields, and think about how the war is something people put on timelines now. Began in this year, ended in that one. But here's the thing. War doesn't end when the shooting stops. It just moves from the trenches to the dining room, to the quiet places inside your skull you don't let anyone else see. You want to know why I'm telling you all this? Because somewhere there's another kid getting on a transport, telling himself he'll come back the same. He won't. And someday he might sit where I am, wondering if he deserves the life he got to keep. If you take anything from this little confession from a nobody named Jack Turner from Kansas, let it be this. Don't let anyone tell you war makes you a man. It doesn't. It just shows you all the ways you can break and still be required to keep walking. I seal the envelope, slide it into a shoebox with the sketchbook, close the lid. Then I look out at the wheat glowing gold in the early light. And I finally say the line I should have written all those years ago. I'm not fine, but I'm still here, and that has to mean something.